He swore she was his absolute dream woman, classy, successful, and everything I supposedly wasn't. Just 5 days after our bitter divorce was finalized, he rushed her down the aisle in a lavish ceremony to rub it in my face. I didn't cry. I didn't beg him to stay. Instead, I waited quietly in the back row of the chapel, sipping sparkling water, counting down the seconds. Because when the bride finally turned around to face the altar, I couldn't hold back my laughter. You see, the woman he traded me for had a jaw-dropping secret, and it was about to destroy his entire life. The ink on our divorce papers was barely dry, yet David was already throwing a lavish celebration to broadcast his ultimate victory. For 12 years, I had stood by his side as he climbed the corporate ladder, managing our home, funding his early ventures, and sacrificing my own ambitions so he could shine. I thought we were partners building a shared legacy. Instead, I learned too late that I was merely a stepping stone. When David demanded a divorce, he didn't hold back his cruelty. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that our marriage had become a dead weight holding him back. He claimed I lacked the ambition, the sophistication, and the high society spark of his dream woman, someone he insisted was destined for a much higher tax bracket than a quiet accountant like me. He packed his bags, leaving behind an empty house and a mountain of emotional shrapnel, entirely convinced he was trading down for a downgrade-free future. What broke my heart wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer arrogance of his exit. He wanted me to feel small, obsolete, and broken. But grief has a funny way of shifting into clarity. As I sat alone in our quiet kitchen surrounded by memories that suddenly felt counterfeit, the crushing sadness began to curdle into something sharp and cold. David thought he had escaped his past and engineered a flawless new life. Little did he know, he had just set the fuse on a catastrophic explosion, and the countdown had already begun. 2 days after I moved into my modest new apartment, the heavy, embossed invitation arrived in the mail. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock bordered in gold leaf, the kind of pretentious stationery David always loved. Inside, embossed in elegant calligraphy, was an announcement for his upcoming wedding to his so-called dream woman, scheduled for the following Saturday at an exclusive country club downtown. At the bottom, penned in David's familiar, arrogant handwriting, was a brief note. Thought you might want to see what a real upgrade looks like. Don't miss it. It was a deliberate, calculated slap in the face. He wanted me to squirm, to wallow in self-pity, and to witness his supposed triumph firsthand. Most people would have thrown the invitation straight into the shredder and blocked his number forever. Instead, I stared at the gold lettering, tracing the embossed lines with my thumb. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. David thought he was pulling the strings, orchestrating the ultimate humiliation to punish me for not fitting into his glossy new world. He assumed I'd stay home crying into a tub of ice cream, but he had fundamentally miscalculated. He had no idea what I had discovered on his old laptop the night before he packed his bags, and he certainly didn't know that his precious dream woman was harboring a secret so explosive it was guaranteed to tear his shiny new life apart at the seams. Saturday afternoon arrived with a heavy, oppressive heat that matched the tension in my chest. I pulled my sedan into the sprawling, manicured parking lot of the Azure Crest Country Club, the very venue where David was hosting his high society wedding. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms jogged back and forth, parking foreign sports cars and luxury sedans belonging to elites who wouldn't give someone like me a second glance. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple, elegant emerald green dress, nothing flashy, but sharp enough to hold my own. Stepping out, the humid air clung to my skin as I walked past the manicured hedges toward the grand glass entrance. Security guards stood at the doors, checking gilt-edged invitations. When I approached, the head guard gave me a polite, discerning once-over. "Invitation, ma'am?" he asked, his tone professional. I slid my card from my purse and handed it over. He glanced at it, then looked back at me, a flicker of recognition or perhaps confusion crossing his eyes. But he didn't stop me. He stepped aside, pulling open the heavy mahogany doors. The moment I crossed the threshold, the ambient roar of chatter and clinking champagne flutes hit me. The grand ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, white roses, and tuxedo-clad guests pretending they were royalty. I kept my head high, slipping quietly toward the back rows, entirely unnoticed. David wanted an audience for his grand triumph. He was about to get one. The string quartet in the corner shifted their tempo, playing a sweeping, melancholic melody that commanded absolute silence across the room. A collective hush swept through the rows of seated guests as the heavy oak doors at the front of the chapel slowly swung wide open. The groom stood at the altar, looking immaculate in a tailored tuxedo, a brilliant, triumphant smile stretched across his face as he waited to receive the sophisticated prize he had traded me for. I leaned back slightly in the very last row, resting my hands neatly in my lap, keeping my gaze fixed dead ahead. Down the long aisle she came, draped in custom designer lace, carrying a cascading bouquet of white orchids, moving with the practiced grace of a high society model. Everyone craned their necks forward, whispering praises about how breathtaking she looked, how perfectly matched they were, how David had truly outdone himself this time. She took step after measured step closer to the altar, her veil still veiling her features in a soft, ethereal haze. David's chest puffed out with unmistakable pride, soaking in the admiration of the crowd. But as she finally reached the front, turned around to face the congregation, and pinned back her delicate lace veil to look her groom in the eye, the atmospheric pressure in the entire room seemed to shift instantly. A sharp gasp escaped someone in the second row. A glass flute clinked loudly against a podium. Silence crashed down over the chapel like a physical weight. I didn't try to suppress it anymore. A low, dry chuckle slipped past my lips, echoing clearly through the quiet hall. Because the woman standing under the altar lights wasn't some wealthy socialite or a high-powered corporate executive. I knew every line of her face, every secret she carried, and exactly how she was connected to David's carefully hidden past. The woman standing at the altar, radiant in custom lace and diamond earrings, was not a glamorous stranger from high society. She was Elena Vance, a name I hadn't heard spoken in years, yet one I could never forget. 3 years prior, Elena had been a quiet administrative assistant working in the very same corporate park as David. But she wasn't just an ordinary coworker. She was the central figure in a completely different scandal that David had spent a small fortune and countless lies burying. Back then, Elena and David had engineered a quiet embezzlement scheme, siphoning company funds through shell accounts to fund their lavish tastes while pretending to barely know each other in the office. When the internal audit started closing in, David had panicked. To protect his own skin and keep his rising star reputation intact, he didn't just break things off with Elena. He ruthlessly threw her under the bus. He manipulated corporate records and pinned the entire financial blame squarely on her shoulders, letting her take the fall, face a criminal investigation, and lose everything while he walked away completely clean. I had discovered the truth months later when I stumbled across a hidden folder of legal documents and panicked emails on our home computer. I never confronted David about it, choosing instead to quietly secure copies of every single file, bank transfer, and incriminating memo. I had kept them locked away in a safe deposit box, waiting to see what he would do next. And now, looking at the altar, the puzzle pieces snapped into place with terrifying clarity. David hadn't moved on to a brilliant new elite woman because he wanted a fresh start. He had been blackmailed. Elena had somehow beaten her legal charges, discovered the truth about how David had betrayed her to save himself, and returned with a vengeance. She didn't want a prison sentence for him. She wanted total, absolute destruction. She had re-entered his life under a fabricated identity, wormed her way back into his confidence, and let him fall completely in love with her all over again, leading him willingly, blindly, straight into a trap of his own making. The officiant's voice trembled as he asked if anyone present had objections, breaking the stunned silence of the room. Before David could even draw a breath to answer, Elena slowly turned around to face the crowded pews, her expression completely devoid of any bridal warmth. With shaking hands, she reached into her intricate bouquet of white orchids, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and tossed it right onto the pristine mahogany altar. "I object," Elena's voice rang out clear and cold through the chapel speakers. Not that it matters legally yet, but everyone here should know who they're actually celebrating today. She turned her icy glare directly toward a horrified David, whose triumphant smile had completely evaporated into sheer panic. She opened the folder and began reading aloud the bank transfers, the hidden corporate emails, and the signed confessions from the old embezzlement scheme, the very documents David thought he had buried forever when he framed her years ago. The murmurs among the elite guests swelled into a deafening roar of outrage. Business partners dropped their jaws. Family members looked away in disgust. David lunged forward, stammering denials, his face turning an ash gray as he realized his entire facade of success, wealth, and innocence had shattered into a million pieces in less than 60 seconds. I watched the chaos unfold from the back row, sipping my sparkling water with absolute calm. The dominoes he had so carelessly set up throughout his life had finally collapsed, crushing him underneath their weight. I didn't stick around to watch the police arrive or listen to David's desperate, flailing excuses as the guests streamed out of the chapel in utter shock. I quietly stood up from my seat in the back row, smoothed down the fabric of my green dress, and walked out the heavy mahogany doors into the bright afternoon sun. The suffocating heat of the day felt strangely liberating against my skin. Everything David had built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and betrayal had evaporated in a single afternoon. He had spent years plotting my irrelevance, treating me like a stepping stone while chasing a hollow illusion of status and perfection. Now he was left with nothing. No prestigious career, no society wedding, and no one to blame but himself. As I slid into the driver's seat of my car, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness wash over me. The heavy knot of resentment that had lived in my chest for months finally dissolved completely. I didn't feel anger, and I certainly didn't feel any desire for petty revenge anymore. I just felt clean.
Free.
I started the engine, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the country club without looking back once. My new apartment was small, quiet, and entirely mine. Ahead of me lay a blank page, unburdened by his secrets or his toxic ambition. Let him deal with the wreckage of his own making. I was finally ready to start writing my own story, and for the first time in years, the future looked entirely bright.